Hello, dear sisters and brothers. Today we will share or will try to present to you a transitional time period in Christian history that is the transition from the ancient to the medieval civilization. For the unificationists on this call here, it is also quite interesting to take into consideration the shift from the 400 years of persecution under the Roman Empire that parallels the 400 year of persecution in Egypt, meets with the new era of regional church leadership that was carried out by patriarchs, bishops, or abbots. So we will talk exactly about this transitional time period. And so if you have this in mind, then you may also better see the historical content and in the light of the providential progress. So let us start. I will share screen now. Okay. So Christianity went from a persecuted sect to an imperial state church. So this was a major shift that was the result of this 400 years, nearly 400 years of intense persecution. With the Edict of Milan, Christianity became legalized, got a legal status within the Roman Empire, and the Edict of 392 even made Christianity the official state religion of the Western Roman Empire. Now, as we talk about this, changing of times, this was not something people were looking for to change, but it came upon them with the disintegration of the Roman Empire by external forces mainly, but also by internal strife. So let us look at the internal conditions of the early church that were versing now the new upcoming medieval church. In the early church, the authority was decentralized with multiple centers in and around the Roman Empire. It had a focus in the Greek-speaking East, where the majority of Christians were living, and the political authority were maintained by the Eastern Roman Empire, which were dominated by the churches, which were dominated by the state. On the other hand, the medieval churches got increasingly centralized with the primacy of the Roman Church. And there was a change of shift into the Latin-speaking West. And as the political authority broke down, the church became autonomous and was free to recreate society. The transition to the Western civilization was also triggered by the fall of Rome. The Vandals, first the Visigoths, who were a Germanic tribe that came from the Black Sea, captured Rome. Later on, the Vandals, that is a Germanic tribe from Northern Europe, came to sack Rome. Eventually, they settled in northern Africa. The Visigoths, they settled in southern France and Spain. So by this 476, after in the Common Era, the Western Roman Empire collapses. So it was not only a collapse of a world empire, but also all the underlying premises, the foundation, the ideas of ancient civilization shattered. So let us first have a look at this underlying premises of the ancient civilization to understand the framework of people's mind at a time. It was formed and determined by classicism, which was a form of humanism that was revitalized during the Renaissance. And its fundamental principles were optimism, openness to human culture, emphasis on human achievement. In art, it had an aesthetic attitude that draws inspiration from literature and culture of ancient Greece and Rome. So it emphasized the principle of harmony, idealism, proportion, restraint, and balance. So classicism seeks to represent things in their most beautiful, ideal state, often focusing on form, simplicity, and clarity. Yeah. In terms of philosophy, to mention here is Socrates and Plato, which saw knowledge as a virtue, meaning to know the good means to do the good. Yeah. So they thought to construct an ideal society by philosophy. Yeah. And in the Roman world, there was a political expression about it that came by Augustus Caesar. He attempted to create a framework for eternal political order, and later, the same Augustus, he made this peaceful era, which is called Pax Romana, a world safe and where also a time where Jesus was living, a peaceful surrounding era. And Rome was envisioned as the eternal city. So when finally, through Constantine and Theodosius, the Christian church, became popular, especially under Constantine, there was an attempt to buy into this classical ideal. So most notably, Eusebius of Caesarea, he held Constantine in high regards. He thought Constantine was chosen by God and the Roman Empire ordained by God. Church and empire together were the culmination of human history, and Christianity was the crowning touch on the best in Roman traditions. However, at the same time, church and state basked in light and failure to see the ambiguities, shortcomings, and the dark side of this time. So when the Roman Empire started to collapse and face disarray, there was a time of chaos. Yeah, when Roman eventually, it was not all of a sudden, it took, it was kind of, people felt it and people felt insecure. I don't want to draw lines to today, but in some places in the world, I think people feel very similar. And this forced Christian theologians to re-examine and re-examine the assumption that church and state together represented the culmination of human history. And pagans called to return to the old gods under whom God was protected. Under these circumstances, Augustine wrote The City of God to counter the accusation that Christianity was responsible for the empire's collapse. So out of these ashes of the Roman Empire, a new medieval worldview appeared. We could also maybe think of like an aftermath of a miscarriage that took place, the promised era of the Messiah was not bearing fruit. It was not coming to its fruition. But the Roman Empire had such high promises, and this ideal, you see, would have been perhaps fulfilled with the reign of the Messiah at his time. However, this couldn't be fulfilled, and it was torn apart. And we entered now, instead of the glorious age of the Lord, we entering the repetition of history with the emergence of the importance of church leadership, of regional church leadership, and a new understanding of the human soul, of the human condition. So the fall of Rome and the collapse of the classical world politically and culturally left, like a vacuum. And there was also a recognition by many Christians that there was division and corruption in the imperial church. Many were carrying their memories from the time where their relatives became martyrs, where they were taking a lot upon themselves to be Christian, and they started to remember this. And pagans, especially after 410, blamed Christianity as being the reason for the Rome's collapse. These were troubled times. In the 70 years prior to Diocletian's reign, there were 23 Roman emperors, 20 were assassinated, 1 fell battling the Goths, 1 died as prisoner of the Persians, and 1 perished from the plague. So in response, leading church fathers, notably Augustine, developed a new perspective. They argued that building an ideal order based on reason or politics was a false claim. So they argued that human sinfulness was more widespread than traditional optimism had assumed. In pursuing this line of argument, they began establishing the theological foundation for a new Christian civilization. So they developed a new theology of the human nature, a new theology of the church, and a new theology of politics and history. So the human experience became the source of theology. Christians of the 4th century felt a widespread awareness of sinfulness. Personal struggle and self-reflection formed the foundation of the theology of human nature developed by Augustine and others. During periods of prosperity, thought tends to be influenced by Hellenistic ideas, while in times of hardship, it shifts towards Hebraic thinking, yeah, the religious mind. So after the fall of Rome, in the early time, Christianity given over to idealist portraits of the apostolic age, the martyrs, the saints, and the Christian emperors such as Constantine. After the fall of Rome, realism sets in, and idealist portraits gave way to autobiography of people whom they admired, whom they sought to follow. One of them is Jerome. He is actually a very important figure, especially in translating the Bible into Latin, on which the Catholic Church was relying for 1,500 years. Gonzalez, a Christian author who I think who collected a lot of scripts from the past and put it into his book. He says, quotes Jerome, "Titanic and endless struggle with the world and with himself. The inner turmoil he felt about his attraction to classical culture and obsession with sex." Jerome also had influence on Augustine. Augustine was very much influenced by Jerome's biblical scholarship, particularly his knowledge of Hebrew and Greek texts. So Jerome was on the opinion that we need to go back to the roots. We need to, get it straight from there. But Augustine was more open to the Septuagint. That is where 70 Jewish scholars translated Hebrew scripture into Greek. Yeah, and he was relying more on this and was less concerned about the use of Hebrew in scriptural translation than Jerome. But this was among the very few dissensions he had which he had with Jerome. Now let's look a little bit more on Augustine and also his, you can say, spiritual father and spiritual mother and physical mother. He makes his life like the basis of theology. Yeah, so his torturous past to face was documented in his Confessions. It's a Christian autobiography. So Augustine depicts his nature and motivations in darkest colors. He describes the situation when he was young of stealing fruits. It's not apples, it was pears. But he didn't steal them because he was hungry, but he just wanted to do something bad. And so he describes this, and he puts it as an example for the broader human tendency to sin without reason or justification. He also speaks about his relationship with a concubine, which was a common practice at the time, but he felt this was not right and conflicted with his newfound spiritual beliefs. Yeah. This self-examination plays a key role in themes of sin and grace in his writings. Before that, he was searching different philosophical beliefs, and among them is the Manichaeism, the Stoa, and actually finally he found the Christian faith. A decisive moment was when he met with Ambrose of Milan, was a bishop there, and Another factor was his mother Monica, who prayed tirelessly for his conversion. And eventually he found peace and stability in the Christian faith and was baptized. He was born in Trier. No, sorry, he was not. Ambrosius was born in Trier. Augustine actually was born in Hippo. I believe this is today's Algeria. He's from Africa. Like many great church leaders came from Egypt and Northern Africa. So also Augustine. Besides Augustine, there were those who remembered the old days of the martyrs and their tribulation. So instead of, turning, because there was nobody to persecute them, they took it upon themselves to persecute themselves. For thousands of laymen withdrew from the churches whose status had shifted from that of persecution to that of luxury and honor. So they were displeased with this new type of lifestyle of the church. They saw that's not in line with its founder. So rather than to be a part of that, they withdrew to the solitude of the desert and carried on a struggle against their fleshly nature. And this would eventually find permanent expression in the monastic tradition, first in solitude, where they were seeking extreme isolation. There are famous stories of such monks who went only 2 times back to the people, otherwise stayed alone in caves, but their presence was known and they got visitors, and they laid like the groundwork for the Christian spiritual foundation. One of them was Benedict of Nursia, a very interesting person. He was also living in a cave, and he faced numerous temptations and challenges, but he remained steadfast in his faith. His reputation for holiness grew and eventually attracted followers who sought to live under his guidance. And this led to the establishment of several monasteries, with Monte Cassino becoming the most famous. He recalled an evil spirit that came to him once in form of a woman he had once seen. And before he realized it is emotions were carrying him away. Before he could start to think, his emotions were carrying him away. Almost overcoming the struggle, he was on the point of abandoning the lonely wilderness, when suddenly, with the help of God's grace, he came to himself. He noticed a thick patch of nettles and briars next to him. Throwing his garment aside, he flung himself naked into the sharp thorns and stinging nettles. There he rolled and tossed until his whole body was in pain and covered with blood. So complete was his triumph that from then on, as he later told his disciples, he never experienced another temptation of this kind. So these are our founders. This is our foundation upon which we are resting. Such kind of people who overcome such important struggles. Augustine's contribution was that he developed a fresh theological categories to express deepened sense of human sinfulness. He hammered out his view in the context of a theological controversy with Christians who held optimistic views of human nature. Yeah. His major opponent here was Pelagius, a celebrated British monk known for his piety and asceticism. Their dispute is known as the Pelagian controversy. Here's a painting of Augustinus. So what is Pelagianism saying? So first of all, he, as mentioned, he was a pious monk, and led a movement of a religious reform that had been spreading from Rome to southern Italy and Sicily. He called for a strict standard of moral perfection for all Christians. He asserted it was the obligation of every Christian to achieve perfection by keeping all the commandments of God. So to illustrate the different points of views, I put this here. Augustine would say, "O God, command what you wouldst and grant what thou dost command." So meaning even I cannot do what you command, so you need to help me even in this. Yeah, I'm depending totally on your help, on your grace. Pelagius on the other side says, if God is just, righteous and holy, and God commands of the creature to do something, certainly that creature must have the power and the moral ability within himself to perform it. Which side are you standing on? Then Pelagius was seeking a discussion with Augustine, and while the Visigoths were attacking Italy, Pelagius were escaping and arrived in North Africa and sought out Augustine. But Augustine was away, and Pelagius eventually made his way to Palestine. However, when Augustine returned, he vigorously opposed Pelagius' disciples who had remained behind. Why? Essentially, Pelagius thought that individual Christians were free to sin or not to sin. There was no original sinful condition. Sin was a matter of choice and free will. Human beings have the ability to overcome their sin. On the other hand, Augustine was teaching the doctrine of original sin. He contended humankind had a depraved nature that derived from the fall. After the fall, the only freedom or free will humans have was the freedom to sin. The will itself is sinful. Human beings simply cannot do the good. Seemingly beneficent acts always are tainted by human selfishness. In the end, will always be twisted to serve self-interest. The transmission of sin takes place through excessive desires, such as lust, and original sin is transmitted through natural generations, rendering all humanity corrupt. So then how can we overcome this? It is not possible through the human ability. Humankind is solely dependent on grace. That was his own personal experience. If salvation from sin is wholly the grace of God, it follows that those are saved who God predestines to be saved. Yeah, that was his conclusion. Calvin sometimes is thought to be the originator of the doctrine of predestination, but Augustine actually preceded him. Yeah. So from this, a new theology of the church developed. Rather than idealized portraits, church fathers from the 4th century subjected the church to bitter criticism. There was one famous bishop of Constantinople. His name is Chrysostom, the Golden Mouth. He was a preacher and bishop, and he was, standing up sometimes to the emperor. The people were following him, but when there was trouble, he always he was against violence, so he made himself surrender to the emperor, and eventually the state, the Eastern Roman Empire, took dominance over the church, and this remained, we could say, even until today, when the Orthodox Church in Russia is still blessing the guns of Putin. On the other hand, Jerome says, our walls glitter with gold, and gold gleams upon our ceiling and the capitals of our pillars, yet Christ is dying at our door in the person of the poor, naked, and hungry. So the confrontations with the imperial authority was very famous, was Ambrose, who opposed Empress Justina on heretical worship in Milan. The Arian worship basically emphasized the human nature of Jesus Christ, and it was a big struggle between the Bishop Arius and Athanasius. I explained this to you in an earlier lecture, in which the Athanasian view prevailed in the end, which made Jesus to be God, part of the Trinity. And however, Empress Justina was putting her beliefs in the Arian beliefs and was opposed by Ambrose. And the pressure was so big that she had to surrender and abandon her beliefs and turn towards the reigning beliefs of the time of the church. He also denied Emperor Theodosius entry into the church until he showed repentance for a massacre that happened in Thessalonica. He only initially sent orders to punish the citizens, but when he realized the extent of the violence, he called them back, but it was too late. And Ambrose denied him to partake in the Holy Communion until the emperor showed repentance for his wrongdoing. And eventually Theodosius complied and publicly and repented. Yeah. So this shows the power of the Western Roman Church. On the other side, Chrysostom was banished by the Eastern Emperor for criticizing pomp and folly of the powerful in Constantinople. Yeah. And this remained, or the church always remained under the control of the state until the end. That came 1453 with Sultan Mehmed overtaking the Eastern Roman Empire and Byzance, making it into Constantinople and the Hagia Sophia into a Muslim worship temple. Also on wealth and power, there was a crisis. The elections of bishops were not occasions of prayerful reflection and considerations, but were hotly contested and politicized and even led to street battles between factions. And even in 366 of the Common Age, a disputed election in Rome left 137 people dead. This led to the tradition of pious Christians resisting church office because it was regarded as the surest way to hell. So there was a danger that those who were commanding and in power were evil people, and the good ones who were going into the desert and praying there alone in solitude. So there was a need to develop a code of conduct theology. Yeah. So Augustine's theology of the church became very important, and his influence, of course. He developed a new theology of the church. And he did so again in the heat of controversy, this time against the Donatists. There were a schismatic breakaway church in North Africa. It had to do with the readmission of lapsed and ordination of tainted bishops. Also had to do with Romanized and indigenous populations. The Donatists persisted more than a century as a separatist perfectionist sect. They were also in Northern Africa. And their founder was Donatus Magnus. And they labeled those who handed over sacred texts to the Roman authority during the persecution as traditores. And the Donatists believed that the church should be composed of saints and not sinners. And they argued that sacraments administered by traditores were invalid. This led to a schism within the Church of Carthage, with the Donatists forming their own separate communities. This movement persisted despite opposition from the Roman authorities and the broader Catholic Church. They were known for their strict adherence to purity and their rejection of the authority of clergy who had compromised during the persecutions. Also, the Donatist movement was influenced by the dynamics between the Romanized and the indigenous populations in Northern Africa. So the Donatists primarily consisted of the indigenous Berber population who felt marginalized. So they feared the loss of local identity, and they sought to preserve their cultural and religious identity. Yeah. So it was more than just a religious controversy, it was a cultural controversy. So, however, Augustine rejected the Donatist perfectionist model in favor of an all-inclusive universal church. His vision was that the church, not the empire, was to be universal and gradually envelop the earth. Armed with this vision, Augustine had little patience for the Donatists and wrote, "The clouds roar with thunder that the house of the Lord shall be built throughout the earth, and these frogs sit in their marsh and croak, we are the only Christians." And Augustine was emphasizing two characteristics, a mixed society and a compulsory society. So what does a mixed society mean? It consists of saints and sinners. Like tares and wheat grow together till end of time. Only then they will be separated. And holiness does not depend on sanctity or purity of the minister, but simply on the gracious love of God. The real effective minister of the sacraments is not a human priest, but Christ himself. And about the compulsory society, the church is justified to use force if persuasion doesn't work. Augustine countenanced coercive measures against the Donatists whose churches were torn down. Eventually, this led to the practice of constructive persecution and censorship. It was the obligation of Orthodox intellectuals to identify heresy and bring it to the surface, as Augustine constantly did. So the result were two realities. The result of these two realities, is the collapse of the Roman Empire and the church confrontations. Yeah. So there was vast treatise that criticized the classical view of history and the claim of classical culture to bring humanity to fulfillment. So he argued actually it is not this ideal, and he argued opposite. He said earthly governments built on falsely directed love, a self-centered love, self-centered lust for the visible. States are rooted in intrinsically competitive impulses and erected on a foundation of violence and injustice. The governments are nothing more than a large-scale gangsterism. They are the city of man. And what is the difference to the city of God? First of all, they are locked in a perpetual conflict. The city of man, represented by the state, is governed by a falsely directed love, a love of self. Augustine traced its descent from Cain. The city of God, represented by the church, is governed by a higher love, a love for God. Augustine traced its descent from Abel. This conflict will not be resolved in history, only beyond history. The church too is imperfect and a mixed body composed of saints and sinners. Therefore, humankind's direction is ambiguous and subject to change. Full human fellowship with God will be actualized only beyond history. No salvation in history in this time until the return of Christ. Still, Augustine's writing provided a rationale for the dominance of society and the state by the church. So this, you can see how important those early, Christians were at a transition point from the classical framework into the medieval era, in which a new mindset had to be unlocked, and Augustine was on the forefront, and he did a great job, I would say. So I hope it could give you some nice input and something to reflect on. And also we can perhaps, if you like to discuss about it, or if you have questions, I will try to answer, but I guess there are also people on this call who are able to say something about it.